Welcome to the Agents Angle, bringing you insight from the football agents world, and this week not just through the selective lens of solely football agents, with me, Jonathan Booker.
And me, Peter Paleologos. Today we bring to you the first part of our season finale, with an interview and a special guest offering insights and opinions regarding the FFAR and related matters that have rarely been heard publicly.
We also have news regarding a FIFA circular that substantiates news that we broke on past episodes of the Agents Angle, as well as more potential compliance issues with the possibility of football agents and agencies being classified as employment agents.
All that to come on this episode of the Agents Angle.
As we alluded to on the last episode of the Agents Angle, we have something a bit special for you this week in terms of an interview. And it is something we've been trying to get for some time now, with the whole FFAR, FIFA Football Agent Regulations saga, rumbling on and on. And that is an interview providing an insight as to what has been going on within FIFA itself over the last few years with regards to FFAR, and subsequently the challenges faced by some of those at FIFA who deal with agent-related matters, but may not necessarily be the ones to blame for many of the agent frustrations with FFAR. But before we come to that interview, two important updates for agents, the first of which is a circular from FIFA.
Yes, today's circular that I want to discuss or just raise through briefly is the FIFA circular number 1891. It's entitled FIFA Football Agent Regulations, Exam Dates. It highlights not just exam dates, but other important topics. Firstly, it reminds all the agents or the licensed agents there is a complaints option on the FIFA reporting portal. So agents can put through complaints to FIFA directly for investigations. And we know from our previous coverage of some of the happenings in the FAWG, the FIFA Agent Working Group, there were investigations into complaints. So if you look at the circular, there's an address there where you can make complaints in relation to the agents industry. With that title, obviously, it's the exam. It's the exam dates and what's upcoming. Another exam this year, 20th November 2024, and only one exam next year, which I think be the way going forward, on the 21st of May 2025. So it seems FIFA will go from 2 exams to 1 annually based on this circular. The other one is there's an emphasis that CPD, continuous professional development, needs to be completed. So that's a reminder that pretty much by October, most of the agents have to get their points up, whether it's 20 or 40 CPD points. Now, there's also a mention of the cost of the exam is still 600 USD, but also going forward, once you do get your license, it drops down to $300 USD. Now, out of all this, and this is my opinion, Jonathan, that we've seen a growth in agent-type consulting and training businesses trying to provide services with the exam especially, but also with other matters in relation to the agent business. I recently saw a post on LinkedIn which published around about 20 different agent training courses available worldwide, from Africa to Europe, South America, the US, and I believe one in Asia. Now, we here at the Agents Angle, we do keep abreast of all the available courses for candidates who want to sit the exam. And I will say, over the start of this podcast, these courses have exponentially grown. Over 20 is listed in that post, but it shows that when you bring in regulations, it also brings opportunities for consultants, lawyers, trainers. A whole new industry emerges when there's a new regulatory space occurring. And as we see with these circulars, exams are going to take place. So are consultants going to pounce, or the trainers going to pounce on that?
But I think this circular from FIFA actually demonstrates a bit of a scoop for us, Peter, as we spoke about some of the matters in that circular, especially the AWG in the last episode of the Agents Angle, before that circular from FIFA was released, if not even in previous episodes way before then, on some of the matters. Who knows? Maybe we gave our friends in Zurich a bit of a nudge to be more open on AWG and FFAR matters. But on the subject of things in the agent space that seem to have rumbled on for quite a while, there was another circular of a sort just over a week ago from the FA in England to all their licensed agents. And before people start saying, here we go, Agents Angle talking about England again, it is worth considering England, according to FIFA, does reportedly have the highest number of FFAR licensed agents, one of the biggest football markets, plus over 30% of our listeners are in the UK, of which England is one part. And despite us looking at football agent issues globally, our approach with regards to those topics and articles covered is based on their relevance and importance to the agent's world rather than just geography. But this circular is important as it affects any agent operating in the UK and or possibly has clients in the UK. And understandably, it's caused quite a bit of panic for some agents following its release, as it's underpinned by government legislation. So if we look at this communication from the EAS, which is the Employment Agency Standards Inspectorate, a division of the UK government's Department for Business and Trade, it was forwarded via the English FA to all their licensed agents around about the 28th of June 2024. And it refers to the possibility that football agents and agencies may be classified in the near future as employment agencies, and thus may have to comply with certain additional government legislation. Now, I conferred with someone who knows both the agents world and the aspect of employment law and legislation very well indeed, and they inform me that this has been spoken about before and for quite some time. But in light of matters such as the independent football regulator in the UK, that could prompt something sooner rather than later. But the truth is, no one knows. And my contact general tone was that the thing for agents to be most mindful of with such legislation is that this government department has strong investigatory powers and can levy substantial sanctions, which can ultimately be criminal charges. So a lot more power than the football authorities in many respects. And I had quite a few calls, messages and emails from people over this within a few hours of it being released. And I think the main areas of concern were four things. Firstly, restrictions on the agent being able to charge a player client, as there are restrictions under this legislation on what the agency can charge a work seeker, in this case the player. Two, restrictions on when the agency can charge the work seeker and also the hirer, for example, a club. So in that respect, we are back into the realms of permitted duality and dual representation once again. Then there's the requirement to operate separate client accounts, whether they be players or clubs. And finally, perceived conflicts with these regulations, with some of the football regulations, both national and international, with FIFA and the FFAR. So those are what I believe concern people the most. There were other things, and I have to admit there was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction from me as well when just reading the email and the accompanying attachments. But I can't stress this enough. It is worth looking at this in greater detail and reviewing the supporting guidance from the EAS, not least as they already have exemptions regarding this legislation for music, modelling and entertainment agents. And playing devil's advocate, if it is implemented, yes, it would mean more compliance for football agents, but that could also possibly bring with it some benefits for the industry as a whole.
Very interesting circle, as you say. The Employment Agencies Act of 1973 has legislation which is regulating the private recruitment sector, which pretty much the football agent space is. We are employment agents, or mainly players, to find employment, and that's part of the definition in this act. And I don't want to get too legal on this, but I'll just go through some of those conduct regulations where maybe player agents who are operating or player agencies who are operating may be affected. You mentioned agreeing terms with work seekers, so that can cross-apply to a rep agreement. When I say the rep agreement, the representative agreement between the agent and the player. There's also mention of not restricting the work seeker from working elsewhere. So we've got transfers in football, but what about a situation where an agent tries to stop a player accepting an offer and telling him to accept another offer? You can't restrict that. So that may be in play. The other thing you mentioned was dual representation. Now, the way this conduct regulation talks about, if they charge the work seeker, which would be the player fee, they can't charge the hirer, the engaging club. So no agent fees in that type of dual representation. I mean, this is not official, but if it took effect, that's something extra. So a lot to think about here. But this is similar. We've already talked about this maybe 10, 15, maybe 20 episodes ago, Jonathan, where we talked about the National Football Agent Regulations, and in particular in Switzerland. If you want to work as an agent, a player agent, you needed a license to work in the HR, human resource area, by certain cantons in Switzerland. So this does exist in maybe some other countries. But the big thing is this for me. The FFAR, the FIFA Football Agent Regulation, may be partly suspended, but the agent space is not free from regulation. There are other tools, and we've covered this before. Tax officers, money laundering legislation as it applies in Belgium, maybe other countries. In this case, human resource legislation, recruitment legislation. And then we have state law, which we know in France and Italy applies. So there's a lot to think about. Going forward, we are in the human resource business. There's going to be definitely more compliance. We do manage job recruitment, and we can have some learnings from the actual recruitment industry itself. And I want to finish on this point. We also have to be careful. As agents, we owe a duty of care to the player. They're the principal, we're the agent. And this sometimes differ from the usual human resource recruitment model, which is more of a placement model where they also get a commission, but the duty may be a little bit different.
Just to close off on this matter, firstly, the deadline specified by the FA to send feedback to the EAS is the 19th of July, I think. So I hope agents do take up that opportunity to consult, if only to demonstrate to the EAS that agents are interested and want to be part of any consultation. Secondly, from the date on this letter and the wording of the communication, it seems the FA and the EAS have been consulting on this matter for some time, which would substantiate the comments made by the expert that I contacted and spoke to on the matter. But this letter, it seems the FA have sat on for 2 months since April before forwarding it to agents, giving agents just a few weeks to consider the information and feedback to the EAS. And this again is during a transfer window, which is sadly reminiscent of what the FA did with their NFAR consultation and the agents late last year. And finally, something that did rub salt in the wound just a bit for me is that the FA cheekily, at the bottom of their email, put that agents should copy in the FA on any feedback to the EAS, which I can categorically tell you I had no intention of doing, and I hope others would have had second thoughts about doing that too. But it is a very, very important subject. Another one to keep an eye on for any agents operating in the UK, not just England, or having clients work with clubs in the UK.
I will say this, Jonathan. Agents need to make submissions as they're an important part of the stakeholder process, and to be able to give an informed view to the regulator here. And how does agency or football agency work, and how does it fit or doesn't fit in the sort of a human resource industry remit? That's important. We need to make submissions, because if we just let people assume things about the business, we know what happens then. So from that, and quite conveniently on the topic of football authorities, we now have something that we mentioned earlier as well as in past episodes, and something, as we said, we consider a bit of a coup for us, Jonathan, and an insight we are privileged to be able to bring to you, albeit somewhat belatedly. And yes, now it's time to introduce our guest. Our guest today is Tarik Ajanovic, a sports lawyer with extensive experience across both the federation, club, and private football spheres. Until recently, Tarik was a senior legal counsel at FIFA, mainly working in the agents department. He was involved in projects including the FIFA Football Agents Exam, the FIFA Football Agents Regulations implementation, the FIFA Football Agents platform, and also the licensing of match agents. Previously, Tarik had roles at the Saudi Arabian Football Federation and at the historic Bosnian club Selik Zenica. Tarik, welcome to the Agents Angle.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here to exchange some of our views, hopefully to clear up some misunderstandings. It's a big pleasure. I'm a big fan of the podcast. I've been following you for quite a long time, even during my time at FIFA. So I can positively say that you really have a voice in the industry. So yeah, good luck.
Thank you for that feedback. Now, the first thing, it's important, and I just want to set the stage in terms of this interview. It's very important to clarify your role, responsibilities, and time at FIFA. As before, our listeners and the agents that listen to this podcast assume you are integral to the direction of the FIFA Football Agent Regulations, which I'll refer to as FFAR going forward. You were not part of the team dealing with the FFAR challenges and litigation. That's from our information. Also, you weren't at FIFA when the main constructs or earlier versions were proposed or frameworks, let alone even conceived. So can you just tell us in brief synopsis of your time at FIFA, your roles and your responsibilities, Tarik?
Yes, so it was, even from this perspective, a wonderful period of 4 years for me where I learned much, interacted with so many different people around the world. I initially signed my contract with FIFA, I believe it was in July 2019, but I joined in March 2020, just at the beginning of the world pandemic. My first few days at FIFA were quite interesting because I just came back from Saudi Arabia and I was traveling around Asia at the time. So people refused to shake my hand at the beginning. I was a bit shocked by. So I spent 4 years there at FIFA. Basically, I left at the end of March this year, so a few months ago. To set the context, I really need to say that the agents department, when I initially joined the department, was something which was quite new within FIFA. So the intermediaries department, as it was called at that time, I believe it was formed around November 2019. So when I joined, it was a very small team where we more or less took over some of the things from our colleagues that had been dealing with the aging space within different departments from the regulatory side, so their status department, director of regulatory as well. So we kind of tried to summarize everything and put everything into one place, the intermediary space at the time and match agents. So my initial task alongside with my colleagues were to more or less analyze all the tools and information we had at our disposal, classify them, and then basically start creating a new regulatory framework for the agents that we had. So in that regard, my kind of first task were related to setting up the IT infrastructure around it, because we knew that in order to have an effective system, which is going to be applied around the world, we wanted to have a centralized online system, which is going to be much more modern than it was in the previous period up to 2015. So in that regard, we started with several RFPs with external partners. Then obviously we analyzed the data we had on hand. So it was a huge amount of research even before we actually started the actual drafting of the regulations. So throughout that process, I was involved in analyzing the submissions from various stakeholders and participants and associations in the consultation process, interaction with them. And as you can imagine, this was quite a challenging process because initially when we planned the meetings, we were hoping to actually have people more or less at one table where we would discuss these issues and challenge each other, try to find the best solutions. But as the pandemic was developing, obviously we had to limit ourselves to video calls. So it was quite challenging at the time. As you rightly said, I was also involved in the creation of the FIFA Football Agent exam, the licensing system, both through the exam process as well through the legacy and national law process. Then for that, obviously, we issued the FAQs document, which I was also involved with my other colleagues. And I also ran the match agent project, something which is not very well known to most agents in the business. I think among with match agent regulations are the oldest piece of regulations within FIFA from 2003. So yeah, I mean, in that regard, it was a role which was oriented to several different stakeholders and several different projects. It was challenging, but at the same time, it was wonderful to be exposed to so many new opportunities and new experiences. When you're building something new, you never know what's around the corner. There are always people who will disagree with you, even if you're trying to do something which actually benefits them. So it was both challenging and rewarding at the same time. I'm obviously aware the FFAR, as they are today, their current form, are not very popular among agents. And I understand that particular reasoning. I even agree with them to some point. There are certain provisions of the FFAR even I don't agree with. I think some solutions could have been better, but we will see if it actually succeeds to bring more clarity and transparency in order into the agent business and the agent industry. So we'll see what happens next in the coming months, if not years.
You mentioned you're now out of FIFA and you've had probably a chance to reflect a little bit on the implementation of the FFAR and maybe seeing it from different angles. In terms of agent-related matters at FIFA in the agents department, What were the best, worst, and most challenging things you faced at FIFA? Was it timeframes? Was it the difficulty of bringing a new ecosystem together in a regulatory way? Can you give us a little bit of a synopsis about the best, worst, and maybe most challenging things in terms of the agent-related matters at FIFA?
Well, in my opinion, the most difficult part was definitely the politics. Something I did not sign up for, something I hoped to avoid, because I think during my first week at FIFA, I was given correspondence between various stakeholders and agent organizations to go through. And even then, there was a very, I wouldn't say hostile, but at least skeptical relationship between FIFA and some of these organizations about what should be done, what are supposed to be the next steps, who should participate or who shouldn't participate in the process. So for me, it was a bit surprising to see that we are dealing with something which will not necessarily be a legal challenge per se in terms of regulatory creation of the new regulations and the drafting and the policy making, but more of a political thing. We were hoping to have a sit down with all those involved in the process at various levels to actually sit down and speak about these things to try to find common ground. I was quite surprised as well to see the position of some associations, for example. When I initially joined, my expectation was that associations will fight against FIFA intervention or re-intervention in the agent space. I understood, at least from my previous experience, that associations actually want to have a monopoly, more or less, and by that I don't mean anything bad. I just mean that they actually wanted to be the ones to regulate the agency within their territories. It was quite surprised to actually see most associations to have a position where they were quite happy for FIFA to take over, because they understood that it is something they either cannot handle in the best way or they do not want to deal with anymore. So in that regard, I was quite surprised with that. It meant that obviously we had quite a lot more pressure on us to deliver the project because, yes, we were giving input, we were giving valuable information and advice to work with, but at the same sense, at least for me personally, that was quite a big surprise. And I always say this, FIFA is not an expert in these matters. If you're looking at this from a purely legal perspective, FIFA is more or less the regulatory authority, which approves these regulations and then enforces them at various levels. But FIFA is not necessarily the authority for some of the matters. So obviously it has to go out and consult with these experts in the field. So for example, if FIFA wants to introduce a new rule regarding something which is very technical, obviously it will consult with FIFPro and players and experts in that space before actually making a decision and then regulating it in a way that is actually implemented around the world in a unified way. So I'll talk a lot with match agents, for example. Match agents, when I initially joined, the portfolio, so to speak, was a part of the player status department. So our department, which was new, which didn't exist a few months prior to that, actually wanted to understand the whole space. So we reached out to match agents, the one organization they have, and some of the experts that we managed to identify through our mutual contacts as well. We spoke to them and said, listen, you're the experts. We want to hear from you. What are your biggest challenges? What are your biggest fears? What are your proposals? So this is the approach we had with match agents. And my hope at the time was that we will have the same approach with agents, because I felt that unfortunately, although we, obviously I'm just now speaking from the perspective of the agent department, the people who were my team members and who worked with me, and we wanted to do the best job possible. And when we actually started speaking to these agent organizations or individual agents as well, hoping to get some input to challenge some of our views on the regulations, how they should be organized, what should be some of the provisions, what should be some of the decisions. Unfortunately, we were not given that feedback. We were just faced with I can even say, to some extent, even some hostile communication that personally surprised me. I was hoping for a more open dialogue. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. So to answer your question, I think the biggest challenges were the same challenges that are the biggest challenges for FIFA today as well. There isn't, unfortunately, consensus between FIFA and some of the organizations which are challenging the FFAR, as well as some individuals, obviously, that are challenging the regulations before the courts of law. Nobody expected it to be a one-sided conversation or even situation where everybody is in agreement. But I think for me personally, that was the biggest challenge at the time. So obviously, pandemic combined with the politics of it all, and obviously some restructuring within FIFA at the time, because obviously some people were leaving that were experts in their particular fields, which we need in them. So obviously, this is something that FIFA is going to have to be dealing with in the future as well. But all in all, I think when you actually consider all those challenges, I think it turned out well, at least from our perspective. So yeah, it was something different. But 4 years, when I look back, I think it was something really good. I enjoyed my time there. So I'm grateful to my colleagues and FIFA for the opportunity. And let's see what's next.
You just mentioned two types of associations. You mentioned that the remit was given by the national associations to FIFA to implement something with agents. Is that the position that most of the national associations, when I mean the national football associations, the FAs, gave remit to FIFA to come back to some sort of FFAR licensing? Was that sort of the urge or the push by associations for FIFA to take the initiative here?
I don't think that it was a push from the association to actually do it, at least from what I saw during my time with FIFA. I was just surprised by the reaction. I wasn't at FIFA when these initial meetings took place. Obviously, I just read the minutes and obviously talked to my colleagues who had been present at those meetings. I was just quite surprised to hear representatives of associations which didn't really mind FIFA taking over, because they themselves said, listen, we are struggling with A, B, and C. We are not in a position to regulate the market in the best way. We are aware that there are many intermediaries out there that are coming in. They're not vetted in any way. We are trying to do some sort of a background check with some sort of criminal records check or something similar. But unfortunately, many of them simply operate outside this space. So we welcome this initiative from FIFA to re-regulate the industry, to put in certain standards and introduce more transparency. So incentives was good, because I believe throughout your podcast, many of your guests as well as yourselves have said that the FFAR definitely brings in certain changes, innovation, or at least reintroduces them, which are necessary, like the licensing system. As far as I'm aware, the majority of these legal challenges are not even referring to the licensing system. Most agents out there really welcome it. Unfortunately, some of them have failed to pass the exam or have failed to follow the legacy path, so they're not in a very unwelcoming position. But at the same time, the transparency which FIFA has been trying to introduce over the past years is now challenged as well. So we're not necessarily getting, in my opinion, we're not necessarily getting the result which had been the original FIFA intention from the outset. So I'll give you an example. While we talked to these associations, they obviously had a particular idea on how certain things should be regulated and what will be the end result, for example, on the FIFA agent platform. Our idea was to put everything in the FIFA agent platform and transparently show as much information as we can for the benefit of the agents, clubs, players, and all those involved in the industry. So what happened is that initially, when FIFA published, for example, the FIFA Football Agent Directory, quite a few associations reached out to us and said, listen, we would really like to have a filter where you can filter agents by residency, for example. And this is a value which is obviously stored in the FIFA database, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to show that. And we considered it, but at the same time, we were then faced with a backlash from agents that said, yes, but I do not want to disclose my country of residency for a number of reasons. So at the end of the day, there are certain solutions which FIFA has already developed as maybe already in the pipeline, but unfortunately, these legal challenges and the pushback, at least in my opinion, FIFA is now probably waiting to see what happens next to continue the project or refocus the project. We'll see what happens. Obviously, we have to wait for the decision of the ECJ and these other courts as well.
Yeah, just for our listeners, the ECJ is the European Court of Justice, where a lot of the German cases, and I would say the European Union cases, will end up in that one important decision going forward. Could be a few years away. I just want to focus on the agent's business. You were never an agent yourself. I know you had scouting, you had club responsibilities. Obviously, you're involved in national associations and also FIFA. What key insights, learnings, and takeaways from your dealing with agents while you're at the FIFA, especially the agents department, make you appreciate more the role of the agents? And did anything surprise you from your interactions or the learnings you had from this whole experience?
Well, that's a good question, actually. Prior to joining FIFA, I think I had 8 years of experience dealing with various agencies. So I was never an intermediary, but I supported intermediaries with some of my legal advice, and I drafted a number of representation agreements, transfer agreements, player agreements as well. So in that regard, I did have a sense of the industry. I had been involved in it actively for 8 years. Obviously, I come from a background which is not elite football. as you know, I am from Bosnia-Herzegovina. I work for Čelizanica, one of the biggest Bosnian clubs. So in a sense, I think it actually gave me a unique perspective within FIFA, because whenever I was talking to my colleagues and some of these bigger organizations, agents that were dealing, for example, with the English Premier League, they were always talking about millions going left and right, these amazing deals that everybody wants to be a part of. But at least from my experience, I always try to put in a good word, so to say, for the other and tail end of the business, for those agents that are not necessarily dealing with millions and millions on a daily basis, where they are hoping for a six-figure deal for one of their players as the best possible deal they can get within one particular year. So the insights from that part of my career prior to FIFA, I think, were quite beneficial when we actually considered the situation of these agents. So I'm happy that we did get some input from certain individuals and organizations from around the world that are not necessarily just dealing with the top elite level. And I think everybody right now is always talking about Africa and what's happening in Africa, both the good things and the bad things. So in that regard, I think it was quite useful to speak to some of our African colleagues, because quite a lot of talent is leading the African associations and African clubs to go to Europe. During my time with the club, with Čelik, I also saw firsthand how some good practices and bad practices by agents can really, really affect clubs and players. So sometimes you will see, especially if we're dealing with very young players, you'll see agents that are not in real age. I mean, when I say real agents, they're not professional agents in the sense that intermediate work was just a side gig for them, so to speak. So they were teachers, taxi drivers, engineers, doctors. We had quite a few doctors for some reason, I don't know. Dealing with intermediary business. So in that regard, I was aware why licensing is important to set the minimum level of professional standards. And I also understood that it is very important to insist on further education or ongoing education of those that are licensed. So you are well aware that FIFA has CPD. I think CPD, as it stands now, has a lot more room to grow. And I know that my colleagues at FIFA have prepared some very good projects. They are in the pipeline, which will be released soon. So I'm aware of the criticisms against CPD, that it is maybe not enough, and then maybe something more should be done in that regard. And I definitely think that FIFA has done quite a lot, and it will release it in coming years. So maybe I'm a bit romanticizing that, but in the same sense, I think my previous experience with a background, which is non-elite football, it is elite for me. My club is the biggest club in the world for me, and it has always been in my heart. But I think it gave me an insight to appreciate the difficulties the majority of agents are dealing with. I think at the moment we have several thousand agents that are licensed around the world, but probably the industry is much bigger than that. Probably by several, maybe we're talking about 20, 30 former intermediaries. Hopefully the majority of them will become licensed very soon. So I think at all times we have to consider that. So my previous experience gave me that edge.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, our podcast, we've had a super agent on, or other big agents, big football lawyers, and we've had smaller agents from Malaysia or Mexico and some other countries. So it is a huge gamut of different people involved in the agent industry. Miami, USA. We know that the FIFA legal team, amongst some other teams, are moving there. From our inquiries and investigational inquiries, and we got resources or sources, about 30% of the original FIFA team may be relocating. From our information, in terms of the agent department, maybe just one member of the agents department from Zurich will move to Miami. This is obviously information we have, but it's nor here or there. From your knowledge, is this representation correct? And do you think the move will have an effect on both FIFA and agents? And the reason I raise it also is they're moving to Miami, which is the USA. We know there's a huge sports agent industry there. They have a different style where the way agents are paid. And we know that player associations do a lot of the regulation in the agent space. How do you see the move to Miami? How will it impact the agents department? And also, do you think the American sports law experience will have an impact on the FIFA legal team and in particular the agent space?
Well, yes, it's definitely a big thing to happen to the FIFA legal team. As you are probably aware, this is not the first move. So a few years ago, I believe it was in 2021 or 2022, the member associations division relocated from Zurich to Paris. So the legal and compliance division to relocate to Miami from Zurich is a part of this kind of wider decentralization which is being done by FIFA. So it's many people think and ask me, is this connected to the challenges in the FFAR? No, this is something that had been planned even before I joined FIFA, I think. So I think during my first weeks in FIFA in 2020, I was already aware that there's a potential move to Miami. So there was something that was discussed between the teams. So we always knew that it is a possibility. When I left FIFA at the end of March, those numbers were quite higher. I understood that many more of my former colleagues will remain at FIFA. So I also read the article, which said that only 30 people, I believe, will relocate from 180, if I'm correct. I'm a bit surprised by that as well, but I think it's just personal preference. I mean, many people, many team members have families, are not necessarily even from Switzerland, so they have already relocated ones from various parts of the world to work and live in Switzerland. And now to relocate to Miami was simply not preferred personal choice for them, and also a professional one, because you have to realize, and this is a good thing, many people in FIFA do not necessarily follow or even like football. So many of these people will simply relocate and start working in other industries. So it's definitely a big blow to FIFA. In my opinion, it will lose so much expertise, insights, which cannot be trained or transferred over to those new colleagues that are being hired. I'm not saying that the new colleagues being hired by FIFA are in some way less experienced or less quality. Absolutely not. Some of them may be even better than the people that have less, including me. It is going to be a huge challenge, huge challenge, because when you lose such a huge chunk of your core legal team, so to say, it is going to require quite a lot of effort and years to actually replace that lost experience. So I transferred over to my own private practice. My other colleagues also transferred over to clubs and associations. So we're going to see more and more of that coming in the next few months. Speaking about the influence of American sports law on the agent space, to be honest, I did not expect it to happen in a sense that many other people may see it. Because during the consultation phase and during the drafting phase, we actually reviewed and researched the existing agent practices in the United States in various sports. So it was a sensible thing to research to see how it is actually done in the NBA, NFL, NCAA. And at the moment when the FFAR were drafted, we actually were already aware of these standards and practices and challenges and good and bad things. So at least the FIFA Agents Department, in my opinion, is not going to be faced with something new, which is coming out of the blue, and they somehow need to adapt to it and react. And I want to be very clear on two things. It's only the FIFA legal and compliance team which is relocating to Miami, but the seat remains in Zurich, Switzerland. So the application of American law to FIFA standards and practices, its relationship with costs and so on, will not change. And yes, my second point, there will definitely be more unique insights from that part of the world, because obviously people that are going to be coming into the FIFA legal team are probably now going to be from that part of the world, not necessarily North America, but from South America as well. Many of them have family ties to the US, and we know that the immigration policies for the US are quite challenging. So we'll see how will FIFA hiring procedures go in the coming years. But definitely another flavor will be added to the FIFA legal team. And I think it's a good thing. We'll see where it goes. But when it comes to the actual changes to the agent space, my personal opinion is that I don't see many, or I at least don't expect many changes there. There may be certain influences. I remember when we drafted the regulations, for us, it was quite interesting to look into how the MLS deals are being done, because obviously it's centralized through the league, and you have the definition of a single entity league, which is more or less there just to represent the MLS. So there are certain things that we've already thought about in advance before the move to Miami. I think if I can only benefit from that, it will be a challenging, I don't want to say experiment, challenging task in front of all of my former colleagues and adventure in Miami, and I hope they settle well.
Very quick question. Do FIFA recognize agents as, when I would say agents, licensed agents, as stakeholders in terms of recognized governance model standards? It isn't 100% clear, and some football stakeholders, such as national member associations of FIFA, state that agents are not stakeholders but participants. What do you think the view is now? I mean, we know that, and we mentioned this before, and you discussed that in terms of agent associations, some engaging with FIFA in terms of the process of the FFAR. I know there was close to 4 versions of what was finalised before the council. In terms of your time in FIFA, were agents seen, or agent associations seen, as stakeholders or more participants?
To my understanding, they're not formal stakeholders at the moment. I do not know if they are going to become stakeholders, formal stakeholders in the future. I will quote one member, or I will try to paraphrase one member of the FIFA Agent Working Group that said in one of those meetings, they said something along the lines of, I've been working for many, many years to bring agents to the table for them to become stakeholders. Although this, i.e. my participation in the Agent Working Group, it's not that, I think is the first step in that direction. So that was welcomed both by the other members of the Agent Working Group and FIFA. So from my understanding of the whole process, at the moment, they're not formal stakeholders, but I've never heard anything within FIFA that agents are barred from participating or that they're enemies of FIFA or anything along those lines. I think if agents actually sit down with FIFA and try to find a common solution and try to find certain common points, which I think they're actually doing that right now through the Agent Working Group, in my opinion, it may happen even on a formal level if certain conditions are met, as you said, governance procedures from the agent side, particularly. So you actually know who's on the other side and who's participating and who's representing.
You mentioned the FIFA Agent Working Group. Is that grouping given FIFA a lot more information about the agent space or about agents' organizations and where they all stand? Has it been, I would say, a good engagement model for FIFA in terms of so far? I know there's only been third meeting, but how do you see things now? You're on the outside, but do you see that working group really, I suppose, growing and influencing what's happening with the FFAR going forward?
I think yes. I want to preface this with one thing which is not necessarily known to those when they actually think about the FIFA Football Agent Group. When these meetings are taking place, it's not necessarily that these agent organizations are 100% aligned with FIFA and saying, yes, we accept everything. They are generally discussions within this group, certain things which are challenged or not necessarily favored by these agent organizations. So I think that's the best way of moving forward to actually find the best solutions. So yes, members of the FIFA Agent Working Group are putting down proposals and presenting certain ideas, which are then taken to the agents department, considered. We obviously had to provide feedback on those, considered both sides for and against, and obviously depending on the organization, some of these things actually were implemented. So, for example, last meeting night, and it was in December in Jeddah, and there, I believe it was one of the proposals from one of the members of the FIFA Agent Working Group to reduce the license fee, because obviously they were representing agents from a particular category, which are not necessarily elite agents. So, as you saw, the result of that was that the license fee was reduced for the second, and years after that was reduced from $600 to $300. And I'm just saying this as one very concrete example. There are many more proposals within the Agent Working Group to FIFA and from FIFA to Agent Working Group, because it's an ongoing consultation process. Whenever FIFA has a particular idea, it will shield it, so to say, to these agent representatives, which will then provide extra feedback. So I have a feeling, once again, that it is not, I don't know if you could call it a body, it is not a group that actually is just there to have a nice lunch and everybody agrees on everything. No, I think it is there to actually challenge FIFA and to propose certain things to FIFA as well. I would have liked to see other agent organizations participating there. Unfortunately, they decided to take the other route to not participate in certain processes of FIFA. So they're right now, as I understand, proposing certain things outside, but they refuse to be within that particular circle. We'll see. It's a litigation strategy. It is a strategic decision on their behalf. We'll see if it goes in their favor. Is it good or not? I'm not the one to judge that. We'll see probably in courts of law. And at the end, if FIFA has a final say in this particular matter when it comes to the further implementation of the FFAR. I hope that in the future, agents will become stakeholders at FIFA level and national levels as well. We'll see what happens there. I really don't know. I'm just speaking about my personal hopes. And once again, whenever FIFA Agent Working Group has a discussion, FIFA is also challenged. So those agents that want to challenge certain parts of the FFAR or want to challenge FIFA, I think it would be best to speak to these organizations which actually have a seat within the Agent Working Group, and then those representatives on behalf of its members will then challenge FIFA and present certain proposals for consideration.
Now, Jonathan, we were planning on only having a normal 20, 30-minute guest interview with Tarik, but he was incredibly, I would say, generous with his time and gave us so many insights and explanations that we are going to bring the second half of this interview to all our listeners in the next episode. We wouldn't be able to do it justice just with one episode here. Tarik covered a lot of ground. The interview went for over an hour, so we really have to present it in two parts. And the good news, though, is you're not going to have to wait 2 weeks for that. It will just be 1 week. For me, I will wait till we play both parts of the interview to give my full observations and feedback on what Tarik has covered. But really, it was a very insightful and I would say compelling interview. Jonathan.
The other thing that some may have noticed from that interview with Tarik is the absence of my dulcet tones, and I think it only right to clarify why that was before some may jump to conclusions. Peter wanted me to participate, but I thought it best I take up more of an observer role with this interview. And despite in the mediation profession, we do have the approach of being hard on the problem whilst being softer on the people. I've been so heavily invested in the topic of agent regulations and subsequently FFAR going back many years that I didn't want to turn an insightful interview into an inquisition that really wasn't deserved. Especially as Tarik had the guts to come on the show and openly answer questions whilst others have refused, if not ghosted us or hidden from us. And he didn't know it would just be you, Peter, firing the questions at him. And so I think we all have to acknowledge that the problem of FFAR, the organisation that is FIFA, and whoever has been so pig-headed on the topic of FFAR, are not the people there on the front line like Tarik, who the agents and others have had to liaise with for several years now. Dare I say, to me at times, they are seemingly trying to do their job with one hand tied behind their backs and seemingly limited resources.
Jonathan, we also need to point out that the interview was recorded several weeks ago. Since such time, the third FIFA Agent Working Group meeting has already taken place. So we didn't have that full context to ask at the interview, of course. We have been, since day one of this podcast, adamant we'll get in someone from FIFA because FIFA is the regulator right now. And we really wanted someone from that perspective to come on the show to be able to give some sort of interview of what happened, what's going on, and what are the future steps.
As you would have guessed, Peter, I made quite a few notes on the interview and also reflecting on it since, and I could dissect it somewhat forensically and at great depth. And with that, debunk a lot of the perceptions from Tarik that I believe stem from many false representations peddled by FIFA as an organisation over the last few years, not just to agents and other football participants, but what may also be to their own staff. So instead, and to save time, I'm going to be a bit more generic in terms of the matters covered in part one of the interview. The first thing for me is that some of the timelines that Tarik spoke about regarding FFAR just don't stack up. And these are just two examples. Firstly is that he started at FIFA in March 2020 and inferred he had been involved throughout the FFAR process. But we know crucial meetings between agents and FIFA representatives presenting some of the main constructs of FFAR may have been some 2 years, if not more, before then. And in that particular meeting, we are reliably informed the central problems with FFAR were made very clear, and ultimately many of the battle lines that exist still today were drawn back then. So I would argue Tarik's job many months later was made very difficult even before he started his role at FIFA, or even signed his contract. 2, he told us there was no intermediary or agents department at FIFA, and it only existed from November 2019. But we still had RWWI, regulations on working with intermediaries, since 2015. So what the hell were FIFA doing in those 4 years of RWWI? Was it just a token document with unimplemented and unenforced set of regulations? So Peter, these timelines and others don't seem to add up, much like what FIFA have been telling the agent community and others for some time now, including the alleged consultation process, which in all honesty is no surprise. Tarik doesn't seem to have any reason to lie about this, and as such, he was quite clear he didn't like the unexpected politics that came with his job at FIFA. So that may explain why he doesn't peek behind the curtain or dig deeper into the underlying issues when he doesn't need to and it isn't expected. And with that, to me, it seems Tarik and possibly others at FIFA have been handed an unwelcome and largely impossible job through no fault of their own, and dare I say, a job of damage limitation.
Tarik obviously came into FIFA already when this process had started, so he wasn't there from the start in terms of what was being planned by FIFA in regards to the new agents regulations. It's a very difficult job. What Tarik was doing is huge planning. You need resources. There are so many stakeholders. You have to manage up. You have to manage down. And who makes the decisions? Are they made in-house? What are the reporting lines? How do you progress matters to get a sign-off? All these are important. We don't know all these, but it takes a while to get decisions and matters settled. And I think people like Tarik and all the people in the agent department at FIFA are doing their best to implement a framework that works. It's a long process. There's a lot of positives and negatives, and there's always going to be battles within an organization of what's going to be implemented or not.
And something we've heard off the record is that quite a few people at FIFA don't agree with several elements of the FFAR. And on that, Tarik said himself, and I quote, FFAR as they are today in their current form aren't very popular amongst agents. And I understand that particular reasoning. I even agree with them to some point. That's worth reflecting on. Even part of the FFAR provision, he said not only that, but that some solutions could have been better. And we have it on good authority that people within FIFA have raised these various issues and sought to address them. So what or who stopped them? And I'm not a fan of a witch hunt, and usually I prefer to seek to resolve issues and highlight responsibilities rather than apportion blame. But the question needs to be asked now, who is responsible for this FFAR debacle? The misguided approach, the poor implementation, not listening to those most affected, and the overall sheer pig-headedness, amongst other things, that in my view, after 6 years has left nothing more than confusion and an utter disaster in its wake. Most of which, I will confidently state, could have been quite easily avoided.
I'm sure there will be lessons learned in all this. But the FIFA Football Agent Regulations is still unfinished as a piece of agent regulation architecture or infrastructure, both from a regulatory but also an operational perspective. This is an architecture for agents that we need. We need regulations, we need certainty in the industry, but we also need something that works and is fit for purpose.
But Tarik himself, he strikes me as a very conscientious guy, and I think from speaking with him, he knows his limitations. Yet I actually get the feeling he has more appreciation of the football world, including agents, than most at FIFA. Not least that we heard many people at FIFA who don't even like football. And it was nice to hear him speak of the so-called non-elite participants, including many agents. Tarik spoke of people leaving who were experts on agent regulatory matters after he started at FIFA. And now with the move to Miami, FIFA are doing the same yet again. But on the topic of Miami, there are a few things I will agree to disagree with Tarik on. When he referred to his view that FIFA's seats and relationship with CAS will remain unchanged, I think this was directed at us, as we were arguably amongst the first to identify the potential for a shift or underlying strategy. But never say never that a convenient seat in Miami, Florida, or elsewhere in the US may emerge as and when it suits FIFA and subsequently FIFA matters at CAS. Plus, Tarik also mentioned the decentralisation of FIFA responsibilities and departments that has already taken place. Then you spoke about the numbers of FIFA people moving to Miami. And yes, it may have been the article we referred to in the past that he was referencing, but the figures we predominantly referred to were verbal references in an interview from one of his colleagues at FIFA. So yet again, it seems mixed messages and numbers coming out of FIFA. Also, remaining on the US sports influence on FIFA, but moving away from the topic of FIFA's move to Miami, it was interesting to hear it mentioned that in the drafting of FFAR, FIFA researched American sports and agent regulations. And this strikes me as a means of trying to legitimize the problematic cap in some way, or possibly maneuver towards a more American regulatory model. And whilst this is a reasonable approach to try and legitimise certain elements, FIFA can't be selective in what they choose to compare from US sports regulations with football regulations elsewhere in the world and negate other matters. Because to an extent, it's like comparing apples and oranges. For example, you don't have CBAs, collective bargaining agreements involving agents, or a predominant franchise model in much of football.
For me, Tarik is also aware and cognizant of smaller agents and what challenges they have in the market. It can be very tough for smaller agents who don't have the portfolio of players or the reach into separate markets. Now, you mentioned the USA agent system. I agree, Jonathan, they're very different. And the move to Miami might be a marker of where the agent regulation may go. We know that in the USA, and it's a bit similar in Australia, and I've mentioned this before, you have collective bargaining agreements with the clubs and players and the league. The agents are run by player unions. They run the agent space and the accreditation. There's caps or luxury taxes and all this sort of thing, and payments that work differently, the way agents are paid from clubs. So yes, anyone would look at the USA on how agency works. They have a history in agency. And in fact, we know that a lot of the bigger agencies in Europe are getting investment just like the clubs. They're buying talent agencies or player agencies. So that's happening as well. The big thing that there are a lot more smaller agents in the football world. And whatever FIFA does, going to Miami and maybe influence what happens in America, and whatever model goes forward, if the FFAR is adjusted or a new model is brought in, it must work. It must be feasible, not just for the big end of town, not just for the talent managers, if that's the American model, but for the smaller agents as well who work hard and bring through a lot of talented players.
Now, the matter of the FIFA AWG, Agent Working Group, which I think it's safe to say we both have mixed feelings about. And I have said many times before, I think the AWG is the right thing, but at the wrong time, at the wrong place, and in the wrong form. Even, dare I say, with some of the wrong people who were selected and appointed by FIFA, but we don't know the criteria on which they were selected. Firstly, in my opinion, the AWG should have come before the consultation on FFAR that Tarik spoke about, and not after. Definitely not after the initial implementation of FFAR, which it ended up being. But again, the problem stems from another interesting insight from Tarik when you asked him about the stakeholder status of agents. And he commented that in his opinion, in the eyes of FIFA, agents are not formal stakeholders, which I would challenge on so many levels, not least the widely accepted governance definitions of what determines a stakeholder. So with that in mind, and now with additional evidence that people at FIFA listen to this show, my question to you, FIFA, is what is FIFA's definition of a stakeholder? Because without going too technical, one of the most basic definitions of a stakeholder, and this was from the Corporate Governance Institute, and I quote, "A stakeholder is an individual or group with an interest or concern in something, especially a business or an organisation." So I would confidently say, as I have argued for many years, that agents are stakeholders, especially on such matters as FFAR and agent-related regulations and issues.
Stakeholder is a key term used by a lot of regulators. It basically means a lot of things. You put a definition there, a corporate governance definition, which is a good definition. It could be your audience, it could be your customers, it could be your partners, it could be your regulated population. And that's what FIFA is doing in the agent space, it's regulating the population of agents. And we saw on the FAWG, we have got other groups like FIFA Pro and European Club Association. So there are other professional associations or groups in there. They can all be stakeholders. There was a mention in the last episode about agent associations obtaining memorandums of understanding with FIFA, MOUs as we call them. However, we also got to look at the agents themselves and the associations. We need to be better organized to be a stakeholder because we maybe haven't been able to, whether it's been through our agent associations or individually, articulated well that we are a significant stakeholder and putting those positions forward. And we need, as agents and associations of agents, need to do a better job. I'm not calling it out. I'm just observing that we also need to take responsibility and get to the table as best we can.
On the topic of agents as stakeholders and also agents associations, this is a matter we've been meaning to feature and cover on the show for quite some time now. I've been involved with several agents associations over the years, whether solely as a member or an officer of such associations, whether it be general secretary, board member, or committee member. And of course, Peter, you're heavily involved with the Agents Association in Australia and New Zealand. And I get asked by agents, both old and new, about which agents association they should join, as well as others, such as the media, asking who represents the agents. And to be quite honest, I haven't a recommendation as to membership because at the moment and for some time now, I'm not a member of any football agents association, although I do have an increasing preference if I was to join one. So what we did for the show back in April was to send a questionnaire to what we perceive to be the main international and regional agent associations we know of, not the national ones, I hasten to add, because there are quite a few. Some of these international and regional associations have representatives on the AWG at FIFA, and some don't. The questionnaire itself posed a number of questions relating to such things as membership numbers, member fees, member benefits, governance codes, leadership, their stance on FFAR, so that people could make an educated decision about who they should join and or who best represents the interests of football agents. However, in terms of response, it was pretty disappointing, hence the delay with this feature. And believe me, we chase these organisations for their responses, often numerous times, and we know they all received the questionnaire. So the feedback we got was as follows. UEFA from South America did respond, but with more of a statement rather than answers to the questionnaire itself. And Peter, I think you and I will disagree on this one, as I have a bit of scepticism on the track record of UEFA when it comes to pre-prepared statements on matters regarding FFAR. AFA, the African Football Agents Association, also responded, and they pretty much answered every question we posed to them. So thank you to them and their Executive Secretary Josh Edohen for their openness and transparency. EFA, the European Agents Association, didn't respond, despite a senior official saying verbally they would do. PROFA, the Professional Football Agents Association, very much like EFA, didn't really respond, and I believe this was because their board voted not to answer the questions and engage, despite their president being a former guest on the show. Also, on a personal note, I think PROFA's board collectively should consider who their short notice expert witnesses are at CAS and have been in the past. And TFF, the Football Forum, who are the only one of the associations not represented on the AWG, did respond, quite promptly in fact. I think they were the first to actually respond, and they kept us up to date on their leadership review in the questionnaire. Yet in the end, they weren't prepared to answer the questions in the questionnaire either, and were quite open in telling us why, which to an extent I can appreciate, as it both had a legal and political aspect to it, given the current legal matters ongoing regarding FFAR. As I said, the African Agents Association did respond quite conclusively, but I'm not going to unfairly scrutinise their answers when others chose not to demonstrate the same level of openness and transparency.
Talking about these organizations, since we're on agent organizations, I'm going to take it a little bit different from experience and having a lot of dealings with them. As you said, I'm part of the Australian and New Zealand, and I've had dealings with pretty much most agent associations. I just want to give some observations for listeners about some of these associations. Now, we didn't get the questionnaire other than from the African Association. For me, the African Football Agents Association are doing great things in Africa. They've got conferences, they've got courses for agents to assist them to pass the exam. They've actually been lobbying FIFA on several topics important to the members, including the cost of the license or the renewal, and also the charges for the exam by their national associations in that area. PROFA, you mentioned, they ran that case against FIFA at the Court of Arbitration of Sport. That was a big case. They didn't win it, but that would have taken a lot out of any organization. I know they're trying to build a little bit in Asia, and their president, who I'll say is a friend of mine, Paddy Dominguez, does a lot of pro bono work to help other members. So they do provide, at least Paddy does, a lot of pro bono advice to new and smaller agents. EFA, the European Football Agents Association. They're a historic organisation with huge footprint in the agent regulation space. As I know, they've been in concert with the European Union and also universities. Their General Secretary, Roberto Branco Martins, is very hardworking. Now, why do we get a response? Maybe they're very coy about engaging with a questionnaire. Now, you mentioned the Football Forum. They have a lot of things going on. I noticed they've got a new initiative where they're joining UEFA in its player agents course, providing lecturers and expertise. They've actually run some interesting forums as well in Italy and Germany recently. So a lot going on in that space. Now, we disagree on UEFA, and I spell that UAIFA. They're actually a South American organization, not UEFA, who are running the Euro 2004 at the moment. They responded at least. It may be limited detail. They're very active across South America, but they did respond. Now, they didn't go into the granular of the questions, Jonathan, and I take your point. We'll leave that. Now, I think all agent associations and groupings are very careful in releasing information. It's that kind of industry. It's a very competitive business, and this flows into their comms policy or communications policy. Everyone is protective. If someone else doesn't provide it, I don't want to provide it. I think that plays a big part in how the responses or non-responses of the questionnaire. Yes, our podcast, The Agents Angle, aims to provide some details into the major agents organization. We really want to do that because, Jonathan, you've been asked so many times, which one should I join at a national level or an international level? However, maybe because of the FFAR is still somewhat in limbo, not every association is keeping its cards close to its chest. It's understandable from my perspective, but that's the challenge we have, Jonathan.
We're back to this point as stakeholders, and I think the agents associations miss the point as well, because their primary stakeholders are their members. And if they're not prepared to share this information, there's a huge problem there as well. They're actually showing signs that are reminiscent of FIFA with the FFAR and the relationship with agents. So what I'm about to say is probably not going to be pleasant hearing for quite a few people or organisations who claim to represent football agents. So Peter, hold my pint and get the soapbox. Firstly, there is a lot of deserved blame fired in the direction of FIFA over FFAR. We've done a lot of that, and a lot of the blame for the FFAR and agent regulations is justified, as I believe FIFA started the fire and have continued to stoke that fire on FFAR. But there is also a huge amount of responsibility and criticism, if not blame, to be fired squarely at agents and agents associations, both past and present, for this uncertainty the industry and agents as a whole now face. As I said, I have been there at agents associations, and I openly admit that I have failed in my attempts to get such associations to adequately and fairly represent member agents' interests and those of the wider licensed football agent community. Yet to be somewhat fair to those agent associations we approach with the questionnaire, correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, 4 I believe were only really conceived around the time FFAR came to the fore or soon after. So in essence, could be considered a reaction prompted by the dissatisfaction with and the threat posed by FFAR to agents. But in that, it shouldn't have taken FFAR to stir such groups into action, and arguably that should have been happening at least in 2014-2015 with the advent of RWWI. The other association we sent the questionnaire to was around prior to the first signs of FFAR, and in fact well before 2015 and RWWI. So what have they done since 2015 and RWWI, or even possibly before that? There's been plenty of time to establish some form of agent license, CPD, accreditation for football agents, or even establish a stakeholder body that could have been recognised by FIFA and been instrumental in moulding FFAR and demand stakeholder status for agents in a similar way to FIFPro for players. But I can safely say that since 2015, it seems football agents associations and those who supposedly lead them were largely the same as FIFA and asleep on the job. And therefore, agents associations and those involved should ultimately shoulder a lot more responsibility for FFAR and the uncertainty in the football agent industry.
There's no doubt about that agent associations should have been a little bit more active, maybe a bit more strategic, I would say. But at the end of the day, FIFA is the regulator in the space so far. And if you're not getting the engagement fully, it makes it very hard. But also, with the agent associations, a lot of them are non-for-profit. They don't have paid staff. It's a lot of work, and all the agents who are members, or whether on the committee or members of these associations, have their own business clients and commitments, and most of them are volunteering their time to their associations. But I agree with you, Jonathan, that maybe we could have preempted a lot of the things that FIFA came up with. However, we've landed in a place where now things are at a delicate stage, and hopefully sooner or later we get some resolution. But we also have to give some credit here. And I would give a lot of credit to some of the regional agent associations who are doing good things. I know the Japanese, I don't want to talk about us in Australia and New Zealand, but we've been around for over a decade, way before FFAR, even probably way before the intermediate regulations came into place in 2015. We've got Italy as well. They've got a very active agent association. They all provide good services to their members. However, we just find ourselves in this scenario where looking forward, hopefully we get some resolution, because if we're not working together, it makes it hard. But also, there will be MOUs, as I've mentioned before, between FIFA and agent associations coming out of the FIFA Agent Working Group. That's going to be interesting because some associations are going to get those and others are not.
Yeah, some are going to get them and some are not, but how many of their members actually know about them and signing up to them? But that's the past. What about the present and the future? Well, in essence, from the outside looking in on the agents' associations nowadays, since FFAR concepts first cast a shadow over the football agents industry, I think it's safe to say there's been a considerable amount of bickering, bitching, and even threats of legal action between various agents' associations and the agents involved. And I will say it, some of it is quite frankly pathetic. And we used the phrase in the interview with Rafaela Pimenta about FIFA using a divide and conquer strategy with agents over the topic of FFAR. And all I can say is that if FIFA did aim to do that, well done, FIFA. It seems to have worked thus far. But if I had any message to the agents' associations, and we know their representatives listen to the agents' angle, get your statutes and governing documents in order and publish them. Then people may take you more seriously, and ultimately you will demonstrate a certain amount of transparency and legitimacy in who you are, who you represent, and what you stand for. Make those statutes fair, because I know from one person at FIFA, and it isn't Tarik, that one organisation isn't recognised as legitimate or representative of agents by FIFA based on their governing statutes and structure. Although, comically, despite FIFA having that opinion, that agent organisation participates on the FIFA AWG at the invitation of FIFA. Can't make it up, can you, at times? Be open and transparent with members and prospective members. Don't hide your member numbers and other important factors or distort those numbers. Again, I've been there. I know how they can distort things such as membership numbers or the number of agents they represent. And at times, it isn't a lie, it's just a spun misrepresentation, which is probably why some didn't want to answer the questionnaire, because the way we structured the questionnaire, it would have exposed the true numbers behind that. As associations, and I can't stress this enough, agree the matters on which you can agree with other associations, if only for a united front, and represent the collective interests of your members and football agents as a whole. Because I think I'm correct in saying that from our perspective, Peter, and from speaking to people involved with these different associations, there are many things they actually agree on over FFAR. But for me, out of ego, bravado, resentment, or the inability to acknowledge someone else's good ideas, they choose not to reach agreement. For heaven's sake, grow up, some of you, and see the bigger picture.
Oh, wow, Jonathan. Interesting observations. I acknowledge some
I've
of
been bottling it up for a season. It was going to come out, and just the weight on the questionnaire just brings it to the fore.
Look, I acknowledge your concerns and questionnaire and didn't get the information from associations. And as you say, a lot of members or potential members are interested what each association is doing, and obviously you can only do so much. Now, hopefully with the associations going forward, they will provide more information to members, to potential members, also what value they can give and how they've influenced FIFA or how they've influenced the FFAR. Maybe it's time for all the agent associations to get together. I haven't seen a one-day workshop, a one-day conference and bring all the ideas together and see if there is some unity. But that's never happened, where representatives of all have come together for a round table and see where to from here, because there's a lot to discuss. I think it's time for a cross-agent association conference to nut out what we agree with, what we don't agree with, and what the strategy needs to go forward.
I think that's a great idea. Whether it'll happen and whether you could get them there and whether they'd speak openly and honestly and constructively is another thing altogether. But what they're losing sight of is the people that they actually supposedly represent. There's no problem with having multiple associations. Other professions have multiple associations and unions, and they agree on some things and they don't agree on others, and they work together on some things, but they all have a view that they're representing their members. But as everybody's obviously gathered, I'm hugely disappointed by some of the associations with this questionnaire. Nothing hugely sensitive in the questionnaire, although sadly I didn't expect them to answer all the questions for whatever reason. But they really shouldn't go moaning about the lack of transparency from FIFA when they largely themselves adopt a similar approach. Now, we'll put a link to the questionnaire in the show notes, if only that it may help others to pose those same questions to the organisations when, for example, considering whether to join them or not. As to one prospective member, they may well be more likely to give an answer than they are to a podcast. And to sum up, from our viewpoint, Peter, I hope this goes some way to address that here on the agent's angle, we aren't in anyone's pocket, despite what some may think or accuse us of. We aren't anti-FIFA, we aren't anti-association, we aren't anti-club, but what we are advocates of a professional, effective and respected football agent industry, and that football agency is ultimately acknowledged widely as a recognised profession in the future.
I admire your passion, Jonathan, and your passion about the agent industry. We need more of that. And that brings us to the end of this episode of The Agent's Angle, the first part of this season's finale. We will be bringing you the second part of that interview with Tarik next week. This includes, amongst other things, topics and insights relating to the FIFA Agents exam, the Agents platform, licensing, and the new industry spawned from the FIFA Football Agents Regulations. Now, before we close, I just want to remind some of our listeners, on the 19th of July, the Professional Footballers Association, the PFA, or the Footballers Union in Australia, with us, the Australian Football Agents Association, we have a conference in Melbourne. It's always a good event, and I'm hoping to see a lot of colleagues at that. Also, I noticed the AIAF, the International Football Lawyers Association conference, which is scheduled in Saudi Arabia in November 2024, has been switched from Jeddah to Riyadh, the capital city. So take a note of that. It's bye from me. I hope all agents get an opportunity to do more player deals this window, which is in probably quite a tight market.
And as always, send those questions to us via the various social media channels, or even better, email the show on questions@theagentsangle.com. So I'm off to put my soapbox back in storage, unless it is needed next week. And until the next episode of The Agent's Angle, please do take care and bye for now.
The purpose of the Agent's Angle podcast is to provide news, information and facilitate discussion on regulatory matters, policies, business trends and issues affecting football agents worldwide. The opinions and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only and should never be considered legal or professional advice. Furthermore, the views expressed by guests are their own and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Thank you for listening.